and keep the tank open, or to enclose the system, use a wet scrubber, and then you could operate at a higher concentration and temperature, maybe with a lower number of tanks. Eventually, that spent acid will need to be disposed of, and that will either go to disposal or neutralisation, or increasingly towards recycling. The ferric chloride, for example, contained in the pickling, if there is a market for it, and this is very dependent on the market, if there is a market, sometimes we can recycle the spent acid to recover the iron chloride, the ferric chloride from the tanks. From the galvanizing bath itself, the immersion in molten zinc, we have a particulate emission, so a non-hazardous, non-toxic emission of small particulate, possibly, usually containing mostly ammonium chloride, and that is controlled by bag filters normally. In the past, sometimes wet scrubbers, but bag filters are extremely efficient in cleaning the captured emissions. So as you can see on the right-hand side of this slide, the galvanizing bath is almost always enclosed, and we can capture 95% of the fume from that tank and control that in a bag filter. We have some recyclables, zinc dross, which comes at the bottom of the bath when the iron and the zinc merge together, and the zinc ash, which is from the oxidation at the top of the tank, and those go to recycling. These are high-value zinc recyclables, and I'll explain a bit more about that in a moment. So actually, from an environmental point of view, the process is very simple. We control the emissions from the hydrochloric acid by control of temperature and concentration, if not with a wet scrubber. Probably the biggest issue in our industry is disposal of the spent acid periodically, but we have a lot of ways of reducing the amount of spent acid we generate, but also hopefully we may have a market for recycling that acid. We control the particulate emissions with the bag filter, and our zinc wastes are actually recyclables, and there is a strong market for those. I spoke about controlling the temperature and the concentration, so we have a very simple guide which combines the temperature of the hydrochloric acid with the concentration, and we know that if we stay in this grey area, so we stay, for example, normally below 14% concentration and below 20 degrees centigrade, we know that we have zero or insignificant emissions from the open tanks. So this is the method of control by temperature and concentration. In terms of recycling, this is a very important part of our industry. Zinc is one of the most strongly recycled metals, along with steel, of course, and you see on this slide those flows. In fact, we use some recycled zinc in Europe from scrap roofs, from the metallic zinc which comes back from 100-year-old zinc roofs in Paris, for example. We melt that zinc and we remelt it, we use it back in our galvanizing plants. But also the ash and the dross, which you see at the top here, there will be some metallic zinc in the ash which comes from the top of the bath, and we can send that also back to the remelting process and use that back in the process. At the end of life, we follow the other path. The zinc that may remain on the steel goes back into the steel recycling process. It emerges in the electric arc furnace dusts and finds its way back into the primary zinc production. So the zinc recycling circuit is a very strong one. It's very well established, and it's driven by economics. Zinc is a valuable metal, and it's therefore demanded by the recycling industry. So that's a little background to the process. Now I'll speak about IPPC and our experience. And of course, this is a very complicated and a very big subject, so I'm just going to say, give you a few highlights and tell you where we are with our revision process at European level. Firstly, we have an industrial emissions directive. We used to have an IPPC directive, since 2011 was IED, Industrial Emissions Directive. But the way that the sectors are organised remains the same. We have an annex to that directive. We have a category 2.3C, which is the application of protective fused metal coats with a level of throughput of 2 tonnes per hour. And that covers principally 2 sectors: the continuous hot dip coated steel industry, normally operated by the steel plants. That's not my business, it's not our business, that's the business of the steel industry. It is a similar process, but the operation is completely different, the applications are different, the coating on the steel is not at the cut edges, so it's a completely different area of application, normally for automotive or refrigerators and things like that. Then we have the batch galvanizing industry, which is my industry. As I've explained, processing normally customers' work, individual items in batches for a complete coverage and actually a much thicker coating and longer life. So those are the 2 sectors of the coating, of the zinc coating industry, that are covered by the ferrous metal processing definition at European level. Now there are other activities under ferrous metal processing like hot rolling, and I'll explain that later. So in the old days, life was quite simple. Actually, we have already a BREF since 2001, developed under the old 1996 IPPC directive. As you may know, these BREFs, the old BREFs, were guidance. They were not legally binding, and their intention was to exchange information between the governments on how to set IPPC permits. So it was purely guidance, and I have to say many people in the industry never read these documents. Many governments never read these documents because they were not forced to do so. So they existed, they were useful references, but had no strong legal basis. Everything changed within the European Union in 2011 with the new Industrial Emissions Directive, IED. And here the BREFs take on a new role, because accompanied with the BREF is what they call the BAT conclusions, the best available technique conclusions. And these BAT conclusions, they are much shorter documents. They are translated into every language of every member state, and they are mandatory. So they are not mandatory on the industry, they are mandatory on the permitting authority within the member state, and they must be used to set the IED permits for the industry. And the only exceptions to that would require special permission from the European Commission or a notification to the European Commission that the national authority would do something different than what is written in these BAT conclusions. So this new system is much more important and therefore has taken a lot of attention. Gradually, and not every sector has been done, the old BREFs are being updated according to the new system. And this is taking, of course, many years, and the ferrous metal processing BREF was delayed for many years by, for various reasons of workload, mainly in the European Commission. The first draft was produced, I think, October 2019. The most recent draft was the July 2020, and that has been significantly updated earlier this year in 2021. This is the European Commission's what they call the Sevilla process, because it's operated by the European Commission office in Sevilla, in Spain. I will not go through every point of this, but important is there is a technical working group, the TWG, and as you can see, this involves industry, the member states, and the environmental or NGOs. So EGGA, my organisation, along with Eurofer, the European Steel Association, have been very active as part of the technical working group for the development of the ferrous metal processing breath. And this breath is not finished. It's really important to emphasise that point. It will be finished probably. The technical content was heavily revised earlier this year, and we broadly know the technical content, but in fact the final process will not be completed probably until early 2022. An important part of this process also, it's not obvious from this slide, so I added it in the red there, is the information. During this process, we collected detailed information from around 100 plants on the performance of those plants, emissions and inputs, energy use, and this data is very important in developing the BAT conclusions along with the breath. So it's a collaborative process between the industry and the regulators, and importantly the environmental NGOs. They play also an important and very credible role in the process. But it's very much based on the data which is collected from the plants. And to give you an idea of that, I know you will not read this slide, but this is an idea of the complexity. This is the dust emissions, the particulate emissions from the plants, from around 100 plants. They plot this on a graph, and from this chart, we can then start to see where possibly the regulatory limits might arise. And as you'll see later, we have a batch conclusion for dust emissions from batch galvanizing plants that says that the regulators at national level should set a limit somewhere between 2 and 5 milligrams per cubic metre. And that is not a number which comes from the air, it's a number which comes from the data. Okay? So that's the importance of the data. We have similar charts. This is for NOx and carbon monoxide emissions from the furnaces, from the heating of the kettle. There's a lot of detailed information. That's really what I want to tell you, is that we have a lot of charts. There are many, many charts, a lot of data driving the process. What's also important is contextual information. This chart is not from the European Commission, it's a chart that we created in analysing the data. And just to give you an idea of the process we have to go through, this is for energy performance. So this is the energy use in kilowatt hours per tonne of steel galvanised. And you can see there is a range. Each number you see on this slide is a plant. It's a code for an anonymous galvanising plant within the data, where we have data for energy performance and the data between the 3 years. And you will see that there are plants which have a low energy consumption per tonne of steel and a high energy consumption. And in this case, the question is, are these people at the left side with the low energy consumption very efficient, and the people on the right side are inefficient? And the answer to that question is no, because we've plotted on this chart the other line, the continuous line, which is the tonnes of steel processed per cubic metre of their galvanising bath. Because if you have a bath of molten zinc, it consumes energy even if it does nothing. If you have no production, you have still an energy use. So the level of production, the level of throughput of the plant is the main determinant of the energy efficiency. And we had to work very hard between the industry and the regulators to recognise this point, using data, using information. And I can tell you that in the final version of, and you see this is from our working drafts from the European Commission, we had initially a limit, or a guidance limit, of 300 to 800 kilowatt hours per tonne. This was the conclusion coming only from the data. You can see 300 is somewhere around here, 800 is here, and you had some plants which are above 800. And the reason these plants are above 800 is because they have a very low level of production for the size of their plant. You can see in note number 2, the pink is something that we added, or the European Commission added, in February 2021. We now have a footnote which says that the energy consumption can be up to 1,200 kilowatt hours per tonne when the average yearly production is below 150 tonnes per cubic metre. So these are small details, but they're very important, because if you are a plant that is at the high end, above 800, you could have a problem with your permitting authority. So these notes, like our note number 2 here, is very important to recognise that depending on your production level, you can have the best energy efficiency measures in the plant, but you would never get below 800 because your production level may be low. Okay? Again, it's just an example of the type of work that we had to do with the European Commission at the end of this process. So coming back to the timeline, the current status as of March 2021, we are still at the final draft stage. We have really, probably technically, everything is finished, but nothing yet is published. And there is a very big difference between the draft of October 2019 and the March 2021. So it's very important, if you have the draft, the old draft, the new draft and the new conclusions, there are very big differences and very important things to take account of. Just another example of that, we had some discussion about NOx emissions from the furnaces. From the 2019 draft, we had a BAT AEL, so this would be a legally binding emission limit of between 70 and 150. In 2021 version, this is now changed to 300. So the upper end, which is very important, is amended. And this was done in the meetings in February 2021. So, let me summarise in view of the time. I did not speak much about this, but batch hot dip galvanizing is a really important contributor to sustainable buildings and infrastructure. It's a simple process, it's low environmental impact, and it ensures that our infrastructure, our steel infrastructure, lasts its lifetime with no maintenance. No maintenance painting, no need to replace it, it lasts the whole time. And in this modern days of circular economy and achieving climate neutrality, this is becoming very, very important and increasingly recognised. As far as IPPC is concerned, I would summarise it this way. We are put together with hot rolling, big steel processes in the regulations in Europe. That creates some difficulties for us because hot dip galvanizing plants are actually quite small. We have much lower operating temperatures. We galvanize just above the melting point of zinc, around 450 degrees centigrade. A hot rolling furnace is running over 1,000 degrees centigrade or maybe slightly lower. So it's a very different temperature range. The mass flows of our emissions are much, much lower than most steel-related processes. Usually we only have one activity. We are not connected on a large site to other IPPC activities. And we have a very varied size, type and work mix of the plant. No galvanizing plant is the same as the next one. They are all very different. Small plants for fasteners, for nuts and bolts and small parts. Large plants for structural steel, for bridges and big structures like telecommunications and so on. So when you compare the environmental performance of batch galvanizing plants it's very important to take account of their size, the type and the work mix of the plant. And you saw this from the energy example. If you're looking at what's happening at European level, I do think it's very important to look at the final draft version of March 2021. Probably this will not be published till early 2022, at least the legal basis. When it is published, all new plants in Europe immediately have to follow these requirements. But I think we have 4 years for the existing plants. So existing plants have 4 years to meet the new requirements, or the permits have to be updated to the new requirements. So it doesn't come immediately for the existing plants. So I hope that's been useful. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you. It's really good that you can hold this conference. It's so many conferences are postponed and cancelled because of the COVID. So I think you've done a great job to get this organised, and also nice to see people sitting in a meeting room. First time I saw that for a long time. So very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and I want to present my Vice Rector, Professor Dr. Mustafa Yaşar, for your speech.
Hi, Doctor. I am very happy for your presentation. Really, we are very happy now because maybe the digital area may be different from sometimes face-to-face speaking is different. But all your presentation also it is divided in the YouTube channel and also in all the other area. Also there maybe it is very good your presentation for thank a lot now. Okay.
Okay, it's a pleasure, thank you.
I hope we meet in Turkey very short time.
And also I want, thank you. And I want also present Dr. Osman Yıldız.
Hello? Can you hear me? Hello?
We are here.
Can you hear me? Yes?
Yes, Doctor, yes, we are here.
Okay. First of all, I greet valuable participants. I wish our symposium and success, and thank everyone who contributed. Dear Mr. Cook, hello, how are you? I would like to say something, Mr. Cook. Mr. Cook has always supported us and informed us about the new approach and practice on IPCC. Thank you very much for attending our symposium and sharing this valuable information with us. I hope we can welcome Turkey as well. See you maybe next time. I would like to say to stay healthy. I hope everything is okay. See you, everybody. Thank you very much.
Tüm katılımcılarımıza teşekkür ederiz. Konferansımızın, sempozyumumuzun ilk bölümü bu şekilde tamamlandı. Bundan sonra ayrı sınıflarımız halinde sunumlarımız gerçekleşecek. Öğleden sonra saat 14'te başlayacağız. 3 ayrı salonda gerçekleşecek. Bir salonumuzda deneyecek sempozyumumuz, 2 salonumuzda da ise eş zamanlı olarak ekök sempozyumumuz gerçekleşecek. Herkese katılımları için teşekkür ederiz. Sağ olun. Başarılı bir konferans dilerim inşallah.